It's morning calisthenics for your mind. Finneran's Forum on Boston's talk station AM 680 WRKO.
Welcome back. This is Tom Finneran. You are listening to Finneran's Forum on AM 680 WRKO, Boston and Massachusetts' best and biggest talk show. And we are delighted to welcome Congressman Ron Paul. He's a congressman from Texas, one of the candidates for the presidential nomination on the Republican side, all of whom will be debating in the next couple of days up here in New Hampshire. So we'll be able to see Congressman Ron Paul in another debate performance, but it's even better yet to be able to welcome him to WRKO and Finneran's Forum.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And Congressman, you are making a splash in many, many ways. It is interesting and unusual to see, and I want to confess right away to a sin that I should not commit, but I've committed it, unfortunately, repeatedly. I fall into what I call the top-tier window dressing assessment. And you say, oh, who's got the name recognition? Who's got the money? And, you know who they are in your side, on the Republican side. You're clearly not in that tier, but you continue to make news and make waves. I'm fascinated by this. Tell us what is going on out on the campaign trail with you, Ron, every day.
Well, there's a lot I don't understand. All I know is that there's a lot of people getting very interested, and I think it has to do with the Internet, and that's where we're getting most of the responses, and the Internet leads to other interviews, some major national TV interviews. So I just write it off to saying the philosophy is very powerful. I think it's a very American philosophy of limited government and individual freedom in the Constitution. And I think there's a lot of people who've been starved for that message, and they're responding very favorably. Given
the fact that as a nation, we made the decision. You may have, and I think you did at the time, disagree with the decision to go to war in Iraq. We're in Afghanistan and we're in Iraq, and the mess that we have, and even the president concedes that it's a mess. What would you suggest is the right policy for us today, given the dynamics of the reality on the ground?
Well, we have to reverse course because not only have we gone into Afghanistan and occupied Afghanistan on the pretense of going after Osama bin Laden, here he is in Pakistan, and the people who attacked us came from Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan, we give them more money, and we're their best friends almost. And then we go and start a war in Iraq. So we need to reverse that trend because we're on the verge of attacking Iran. I mean, we have our Navy there. We have troops on both sides of Iran. And I think it's a very dangerous policy. So I'd start removing troops. I'd move the Navy back. I'd turn all the street patrolling over to the Iraqis and let them sort it out. And I'd get our troops out of there.
And you'd get the troops out of Afghanistan as well, even though that purportedly is where Osama and what's left of his leadership is holed up, somewhere in and around the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Yeah, most people believe he's in Pakistan. But I think pursuing Osama bin Laden, which was the original intent to go over there, which we've totally ignored, and we fell short at Tora Bora. We just sort of left that battle and decided that Iraq was more important. So the policy needs to be changed, and I just don't like the policy of foreign interventionism. I think the founders were very clear on the advice that they gave us that we ought to avoid it. And even George Bush won his first election in 2000, criticizing Clinton for being the policeman of the world and
nation building and all that type of stuff.
That, yeah. And the person who argues that case usually wins it, even though when they intend to go to war, they always argue and lie to the people about peace. And just think of how Johnson did it to Barry Goldwater, and even our presidents before World War I and World War II, they always argued, we're going to keep you out of war, but they're always planning war. So the message of peace and avoidance of war is very, very popular. Not only is it popular, it makes the most sense. I don't think we gain anything from this. And
two areas where I want to challenge you, Congressman. Let's stay with the one for current events right now. Iran is moving, it seems to me, on an accelerated pace to acquire the capacity to develop nuclear weapons. And in my opinion, they are a very unstable regime with unstable leadership. They have threatened to wipe Israel off the map. They would like to destroy any influence we have as the United States of America. What is Congressman Ron Paul's position with regard to Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon and its explicit threats against Israel?
Well, I think our policy encourages that because we reward people with nuclear weapons. Look how we have treated North Korea once they exploded a small nuclear weapon. All of a sudden we're over there accommodating, negotiating, and offering them money. Pakistan is a military dictatorship, overthrew an elected government. They have nuclear weapons, and they're harboring Osama bin Laden. I would say treat Iran no differently than Pakistan. They don't have an army of great sorts. They're not going to attack us. Our national security isn't threatened. They don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I think our policy really rewards people for getting these weapons. And I keep thinking about the time I was in the military in the 60s for 5 years in the height of the Cold War. The Soviets had 40,000 of them, and they were in Cuba. And yet, we didn't feel like we had to go to war and have a nuclear confrontation and remove these weapons. So now we go to war in Iraq, and they didn't have them. And if we go and start bombing Iran right now because they might get one someday, our own CIA and even the UN inspectors do not claim that they're on the verge of having a weapon. But to go to war on the potential that somebody might get a weapon someday and not look at the overall policy that actually encourages them to do that, I think is just foolish.
Congressman, but doesn't that policy that you've just advocated, doesn't that leave Israel to the tender mercies and moods of Iran's leadership, none of which seems to embrace any tolerance for the existence of Israel?
I think you could argue the opposite, because we restrain. Anytime there's a conflict over there, Israel has to listen to us, and we have to restrain them. Don't get involved, don't get involved. Israel's the most powerful nation over there. They have nuclear weapons. They could wipe Iran off the face of the earth within an hour, and they know it. The Iranians aren't going to attack Israel. It's all bluff. And I think if we're out of there, there would be a tremendous incentive for Israel to pursue more peaceful arrangements with their neighbors. They have even talked to the Syrians, and yet we put a roadblock there. The Arab League has offered a reasonable alternative to a peace treaty with the Israelis, and there are many Jews in Israel that want that. The liberal Jews of Israel actually argue this case. A lot of good things could come of it without us leaving, and the local people would be solving these problems. Americans wouldn't be killed. We wouldn't be bankrupting our country, and I think the world would be more peaceful, not more likely to have a war.